Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of Writer's Infusion. I'm your host, Susan. I'm here with Dave, Julie, Jen, and Ed, the usual team. And we are here today to critique a short story in its entirety, which is fun. We get to hear the end. It's called The Divorce That Almost Was. It's written by a woman from Massachusetts. I am going to read the summary, and then I'm going to pass it along to Julie to read the story. So this is a story about a professional couple, a doctor and an attorney. Both are in their early 30s with very demanding jobs. Phil wants Sue to slow down and start a family. Finally, he reaches a breaking point and moves out while she is away working on a case.
It was a snowy late fall afternoon as little Johnny ran into the den where his parents, Sue and Phil, sat before the fireplace, toasting marshmallows. Little Johnny uttered his first words, "Dada," while settling into his father's arms. Phil was overjoyed as he ran his fingers through his son's long blonde hair. Sue sat speechless as she watched the reaction between father and son. Suddenly she was taken back to the past, that period in their marriage that almost ended in divorce. With tears in her eyes, Sue left the room, fearing that she would be unable to contain her emotions and the many what-if questions that ran through her mind. What if she and Phil had gone through the divorce that would have robbed father and son of those precious moments? What if that heaven-sent storm that saved their marriage 2 years ago had not occurred? Both Sue and Phil were highly paid professionals who held very demanding jobs. She as an attorney in partnership with the most exclusive law firm in the Midwest, and he as a psychiatrist in private practice and on staff at the local teaching hospital. They had entered into marriage with very secure careers and prenuptial agreements about their wealth and careers. Both were in their late 30s, and Phil was anxious to start a family. Sue knew that her biological clock was ticking away, but her work seemed to have been her top priority. She had suffered several miscarriages during their 4 years of marriage and had been advised by her doctor to slow down. The stress and strain began to take a toll on their marriage. Phil began to spend more and more time at the hospital, while Sue took on more and more cases. After spending several weeks out of town, Sue arrived home one weekend to discover that Phil had moved out. He left a note, which simply stated, "The die is cast. My psyche cannot and will not further engage in this tug of war. A man's greatest contribution to humanity is procreation, which you apparently have no time for." Good riddance, thought Sue, as she hurriedly contacted her best friend who specialized in divorce law. She was advised to think things over for a few days before rushing into something she might regret later. Several days passed. She still had not heard from Phil, so she decided to go full blast into getting a divorce. She knew that an uncontested divorce could be finalized within 6 months. She also knew that their prenuptial agreement stated that any wealth or material things brought into the marriage would remain the sole property of the said owner. She was greatly pleased with that statement in the agreement as she looked around their old antebellum farmhouse, which had been in her family for many generations. One Saturday afternoon, while strolling around on her property, she stopped to watch a school of fish that swam back and forth in the pond. Suddenly, the thought occurred that perhaps she could build a small camp for handicapped children. Several ideas began to pop into her head. She even began to wonder if, perhaps subconsciously, she was attempting to compensate for having several miscarriages. She knew that to give Phil a child would be the utmost fulfillment of their marriage. Sue quickly dismissed that notion and smiled slightly, as she thought there would be plenty of time to plan the camp house. The most compelling task facing her right now was the divorce. She had heard through friends that Phil was staying at the Sunrise Hotel. As she walked back to the house, she decided maybe she would call him about divorce procedures, as he had made no effort to contact her. And this divorce was very important. She spent the next several hours picking up the phone and putting it back down. She just couldn't bring herself to make that call. Around the same time, Phil was sitting in his hotel room brooding. It had crossed his mind that maybe, just maybe, he had dealt with their problems very immaturely. While he had no intention of seeking reconciliation, he thought he and Sue should sit face to face and discuss the matter. He was going back to Hicksville, his hometown, this weekend, where he would be working as a trustee at the local hospital. Maybe Sue would join him there. Several times he picked up the telephone to call her, only to put it down again. He knew he would be leaving the next morning, but wondered if he had the right to impose on Sue with such short notice. Alas, he decided to sleep on that one. Early the next morning, around 5 a.m., before leaving for the airport, Phil dialed Sue. The telephone startled her. She had been up for a while working on a case that would be heard that morning. She all but dropped the telephone when she heard his voice. Phil did not waste time with small talk, but simply asked if she would come down to Hicksville this weekend, where he would be working. He said it was time they held a civic discussion about their marital problems. Sue was about to scream at him when she decided, what the use? Very coolly she declined and stated that any discussion could wait until his return. Quickly, she hung up the phone before he could respond. Sue spent the rest of the day thinking about Phil's call and could hardly wait for her case to end so she could go home. Sue quickly decided against going home and called her friend Lisa, who was also experiencing marital issues. Lisa agreed to meet her for a drink at their favorite spot. Sue arrived at the club early and asked to be seated in an isolated area as she was not in the mood for small talk with the regulars at the club. After waiting a few minutes, Lisa arrived and was ushered to the booth where Sue was waiting. Sue noticed the glow in Lisa's eyes and wondered why her friend was so happy at a time like this. Maybe she had hit the lottery, which they had played for years, or maybe Lisa too was thinking of getting a divorce. After they finished their first drink and had caught up on the latest neighborhood gossip, Lisa had decided to spring the good news to Sue. She said, Bill and I are planning a cruise to try and work out our problems. Why don't you and Phil join us? It could be a new beginning for all of us. Sue almost dropped the glass she was holding and stated, the only place I'm willing to go to join Phil is in divorce court. Lisa said, girlfriend, you don't mean that. They talked for a few more minutes, and as they departed, Lisa said, I will call you in a few days to get your answer. Late one Saturday, as Sue lay in bed, she started thinking about herself and the fact that she had not been feeling well lately. She could not remember when she'd had her last period. She knew it was overdue. She and Phil had now been separated about 12 weeks. She dismissed the notion that she might be pregnant and concluded that she had been working too hard. She made a mental note that she would call her doctor early next week for a complete checkup. Early the next morning, she was jostled out of sleep by a kick to the stomach. She sat upright in bed and cried, oh no, this can't be happening to me. Sue could not allow herself to believe that she was pregnant. The next morning, she got out of bed and went into the bathroom to get a full view of her figure. Yes, she did notice a slight bulge in her stomach. Early Monday morning, she called her gynecologist, who was able to see her that afternoon. Within minutes, her doctor said congratulations, and she suggested stopping by the store on her way home to pick up some maternity clothes. By the time she got home, her mind was in overdrive, wondering how she could keep this secret from Phil. She did not want the pregnancy to interfere with the divorce. She could not forgive Phil for walking out on her while she was away on business. As payback, he must not find out until after the divorce. She would have to avoid him at all costs. Immediately, she called her attorney and instructed him that he would have to deal with Phil in all discussions regarding the divorce, and she did not wish to see or speak with him under any circumstance, not even in court. When Phil called later that week, Sue politely told him to contact her attorney. This went on for several weeks. As fall suddenly turned to winter and snow began to fall, Phil could not understand Sue's strange behavior. Why was she refusing to see him? Weren't they two intelligent adults? A short time later, after a rough week at the office, Phil came home, had a few drinks, and decided he would have it out with Sue. He jumped into his car and headed for the Beltway. He was oblivious to the intensity of the snowstorm. By the time he reached their home, he could barely see the road. He parked, ran up the driveway, rang the bell, and let himself into the house with his key. Sue had just gotten in herself and was in the midst of changing clothes. The blizzard had taken a toll on her nerves. She stood paralyzed in the middle of the floor of her bedroom as Phil called out her name. Damn, she muttered while reaching for her robe, wondering why she had not changed the stupid locks. It was too late now as she stood frozen. Phil could not believe his eyes as he entered their bedroom. He fell to the floor, wrapped his arms around Sue's legs, crying, "Darling, darling." After he recovered from the shock, he stood up, gently wrapped his arm around her very pregnant body, asking, "What have I done to you?" Sue was still in a trance-like condition at this point. As he led Sue to the bed to sit down, he asked, "Can you ever forgive me?" She smiled, burying her face into his chest, and asked, "Can we forgive each other?"
Thank you. All right, so I have to say, I like the last sentence. I know that's a strange place to start, but I liked that idea of forgiving each other. When I think about this story, I think if I'm keeping it to a short story, then I feel like it's good that you have a limited amount of characters. We have a short story. We don't want to have a lot of people in it so we can follow that. I thought that was good. And there's definitely conflict and a basis for a story. So in keeping that in mind, I really felt like a lot of this was more summary than anything else. So as an example, even though I can read that note from Phil and think, oh, what a jerk, or think worse than that, I really don't know what brought him to that point. So,
Right.
and we know that she had a lot of miscarriages, and she was, obviously going through a very difficult time. But the story's also alluding to the fact that she got there because she was working really hard, but we don't know how he felt about that. So I guess to start it off, I'd say there's summary here, but no real in-depth in conversations so that we can really get to know Sue and we can really get to know Phil.
Yeah, I felt similarly. I felt that, there's an expression when you're talking about writing that you want to show and not tell. And I feel
yes.
like there's a lot of telling in this, which could easily be turned into showing. In several places, that when for example, when Sue contacts her best friend to talk about this, that could be a scene.
Absolutely.
Sue is saying this, the friend is saying that, and they're going back and forth. And as Sue talks, we would learn more about what their situation is. So I was looking for a little more in the nature of dialogue, and for actual scenes where there are two people in the room, they're interacting somehow, rather than telling us what was going on in the story.
Yeah, the real trick with writing is the author clearly wanted an outcome that she wanted to have happen. The beauty of good writing is we are following along, and we would come to that conclusion too, rather than the author telling us. And that's the real art that's missing here. I don't think there's anything technically wrong with where the story goes. It's the art of telling this story that's the real problem. Plus, you have to have a character that we're cheering for. Neither one of these people are terribly.
Likeable.
Yeah, I don't like either of them. They're both.
Sympathetic.
They're selfish. They're immature. They're terribly childish. And for two professionals, I'm assuming in their late 20s, early 30s, they should be beyond the high school stuff. And I got tired of listening to whining and all the complaining.
I agree. I want to feel the characters also. I want to feel for them. If I could bring you to page 2, I wanted more build-up. I wanted to hear about the miscarriages. I wanted some compassion. I wanted outrage. I wanted depression. It seems that Phil wrote that note and he lacks compassion. And there must have been something between the two of them before that. There's also the top of page 4, a shift from one paragraph to the next. It says, Sue spent the rest of the day at the very top thinking about Phil's call and could hardly wait for her case to end so she could go home. Next paragraph, Sue quickly decided against going home and called her best friend, Lisa. So I put in instead to have a transition that shows the opposite of that, but I still wonder why the change, and I made a note to that. So think about her motives and think about her actions, and we certainly need more dialogue so we feel.
Also, at that point, she is home. She actually is home. On the previous day, on the previous page, she's been walking around on their property. She's been thinking of having a camp.
I think that was it.
And,
yeah, you're right.
And she hasn't gone anywhere since then.
Right.
So she actually is home. So
that's a very good point.
That was one thing that I found here is that you need to be consistent throughout the story. If people are a certain way, they need to be consistent throughout, unless you're coming up with some reason why they changed. For example, I find it hard to understand how Sue became pregnant because she has had a number of miscarriages, so we would think that an intelligent professional woman would be using birth control. So how did this happen? It makes for a good ending to the story, but I don't understand consistently with what Sue is like. How,
Well, I think, there are a lot of places that allude to what could be a really good conversation. So, for example, when we talk about the miscarriages,
Page.
page 2, the top of page 2, and it's taking a toll on their marriage and they're working more. And you can have a conversation right after
Yes.
she has the latest miscarriage.
Yes.
How is she reacting to it? How is he
Yep.
reacting to it? And right there you'll see, even before that, you can see it on the very first page. I actually thought it was kind of odd that you have a scene, snowy late fall, by the way, pick snowy or fall, because a lot of people who aren't from around here won't even believe that's possible.
I believe it.
But if you picture the parents and this little boy in the room, and the boy says the first words ever, no matter what she's thinking, I just can't picture her leaving the room. It kind of
Yes.
right? She would stay there and want to hear what else he had to say, so maybe there's a different place that you can start that, or maybe it takes her a minute before she gets up and walks into the other room. So there are a lot of little things like that. But even if you want to show their relationship now, then you can show how they're reacting to their child speaking for the first time and how they interact. And then again, like I said, after the miscarriage, and then how do you really get to that point where he writes that letter? You have to get us there, so by then we know what each person is like. So that was my big, and there was another big thing here too. There was a real POV shift, that's point of view. It was always shifting all over the place. You have to pick who's telling the story, and it seems like it's Sue's story.
Well, if it's women's fiction, especially if you call it that, I would say make it
Right.
Sue's story.
That's right. So if you have in the very first paragraph, Phil was overjoyed, you can say that, there was something from Sue's point of view where she saw that, but you can't just say he was overjoyed. And there are a lot of different places that I noted that in here where all of a sudden we're switching to Phil when most of the time we've been with Sue. So you need to keep an eye on that as well.
Okay, here's the English teacher in me. On page 4, third paragraph. After waiting a few minutes, Lisa arrived. It should be after Sue waited a few minutes. It's a misplaced modifier, and it's a pet peeve for moi.
How about we talk about the top of page 3?
Sure.
So this is when she's walking around the property. So she's walking around the property. Suddenly the thought occurred that perhaps she could build a small camp for handicapped children. That came out of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
So she has a couple of sentences.
And it never goes anywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
It
It
came
just
out of nowhere and then it
stops.
just stops.
Yeah.
So
I have that at the
At the
bottom
end
of
of the
page
story-
2, so I don't know how your pagination is.
Oh, sorry, I marked.
No, that's
I
okay.
crossed off some paragraphs.
But if I could say, I wonder what prompted this. Does she have clients she represents who might need, or the children may need such a camp? Does she have
That's the
handicapped relatives?
development part of
Yes.
the story. It needs development all the way
Yes.
through. And, you have, I see you, are you jumping?
no, go ahead.
Okay,
I'll go last. It's fine.
very often, if there's a story like this which has potential but is missing real people, try to rewrite it as a play. Think of this as a play, and you would have 3 lines, the end. Have it as a radio play. People have to say something, draw the audience
need to
in,
use dialogue.
express themselves. He was overjoyed. I'm not going to make it. He has to say, I can't believe what's going on, something like that. Make it into something that is nothing but dialogue. Because very often, beginning writers want the outcome, but don't know how to get there. The best way I know is to write it as a play.
That's a great idea.
That's
I love
wonderful
that
advice.
Okay, the end.
And when we compliment Dave, it's a very special day.
It's odd, it's
Yeah.
very strange.
Just to kind of, everyone here is kind of touching on some of the basics of storytelling, and I just wanted to add one thing to that is that, on the first page, she mentions, what if that heaven-sent storm that saved their marriage 2 years ago had not occurred? And in the end, that storm didn't save their marriage. He went out because he had decided to go see her. It wasn't that he got caught in the storm and, maybe if he got caught in the storm and had no other place to go or
Right.
else he was going to
Good point.
die on the side.
Yeah.
So he had to go back to the house so he wouldn't die of hypothermia. Then that would have paid off on that promise.
That would have made a better story, actually. He could have been going to the local bar.
Yes.
He got nailed
To
with
meet
a
her
storm.
friends.
To meet her friends, yeah. He had a date or something, and he was forced into the house.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. So, so again, if we're talking about just basic story, I do have some things just about kind of the just writing the technical piece. So I don't know if you guys want to
No,
finish
no,
up on
please, carry on.
storytelling. Is everyone
Introduce
have
yourself
anything else to
too.
add on? Okay. So just from a just story mechanics, Sue already talked about the point of view. So one of the things you want to do, which folks have already said, is you want to pull the reader in and have them connect with that character. So I think in a short story, I mean, some short stories will have multiple point of view, but I think that if you have 6 pages, maybe just staying in Sue's point of view might be a good place to start with this story, because I think it is Sue's story. And I want to compliment you on that. I hated Phil. So you, which is a compliment, because you elicited an emotional response in me, which is exactly what you want to do. So Phil, he left her. She was having miscarriages. It wasn't like she wasn't trying to get pregnant. She was.
Right.
The poor thing was having miscarriages, and he left her like.
He's a doctor.
And,
Yes.
he's a psychiatrist.
That's
so
right.
even worse. Like,
Yes.
So I want to.
What have I done to you, he says.
I want to.
I'm thinking, what?
Yeah. So,
You know.
So
Let me sketch it for you.
So I want to compliment you on that, because I got angry, and that's what you want. You want an emotional response. I will say on the first line, just as a general rule, you never want to start with weather. Even though that storm eventually would play into the story, you really don't want to start with weather. I think that the first 3 paragraphs are good for you as the writer, and it's what Dave calls, what do you call it? Clearing the throat, is that what you call it?
Oh, I
So
like
it's good for you to know, but I don't think the reader needs to see any of that. You don't need that backstory. Your story starts where, Sue's biological clock was ticking.
Right.
And I
That's
think
good.
that's where your story starts. And it's very hard to cut words, because you can fall in love with your words, and I know it's very hard to do that. But that would be my advice on the first 3 paragraphs. It's important as a writer that you did it, but I don't think it needs to stay in the story. The other thing is just from a sentence structure, and again with connecting to the character. So, and I highlighted these in green highlighters, so just so you point them up. But you have, she knew that an uncontested divorce could be finalized. She also knew that their prenuptial agreement. She knew that to give Phil a child. You don't want to. You don't need the she knew. It's just an uncontested divorce could be finalized within 6 months.
And you don't want to start every sentence the same way either.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I was
For
jumping
writing.
around because I have them in green highlighter because I'm
I counted 9 she's in one paragraph.
Yeah, and so and again, there's the word echo, right? So you got to
Right.
be careful using the same word in close proximity and your sentence starters. So you don't want every sentence, in a paragraph just start with she. So just look for that. Look for varying your sentence starters and also
And sentence structure too.
and your sentence structure.
It's almost like when you read it out loud, you might want a short sentence, then a longer one with a comma, then a medium-sized sentence. When you read it, it's almost like music.
Yeah.
And if they're all the
Yes.
same, then it can read.
It puts
Kind of
people to
boring.
sleep.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
really
And
what
if you
does.
read it out
It's
loud,
draining.
you'll hear it.
Right.
Because I didn't read this out loud when I was critiquing it, but as Julie was reading it, I heard another word echo and I circled them.
And I wanna-
so read it out loud because you'll hear it.
I want to follow up on the first page.
Excuse me.
Something else to keep in mind when you're writing, especially a story, every word always counts, but especially in a short story. So when you look at the last paragraph on the first page where it starts talking about both Sue and Phil were highly paid professionals, blah, blah, blah. I think you can work that into just a few words into the story, and I actually did that for you on the next page. So instead of talking about their age and what they do, I did, as an example, I said on the next page, when she turned 37, Phil had started to push for them to try to have a baby. Sue had known that her biological clock was ticking away, but her work as a highly paid attorney seemed to have been her top priority. And I'm not saying you have
That's
to
all
do it
you need.
exactly like
Yeah.
that, but that's all you need.
That's all you need.
And that way you're just using your word, peppering it into the story,
Sorry.
rather than just
I
no.
don't even
that
like
I'm-
pepper.
If if I may address words for a moment, on page 1, first paragraph, Sue sat speechless as she watched the reaction between, I would say interaction, you may have meant that, but it's the wrong
Oh,
word
yeah.
choice. Down the bottom of page 1, the end of the both Sue and Phil paragraph, it says Phil was anxious to start a family. And I want to be really careful with anxious. I would say eager. Eager is much more positive than anxious. He'll be anxious once they have a kid on the way. And then, I don't mean that. And then, oh, golly, there was one more. Yes, on page 2, after Phil's lacking compassion note there, it says good ridden. And I've really tried to read the text as it is because we're supposed to do that. But when I read, said good riddance because I couldn't help but make the correction. So I bet your eye corrected it. It's nice to have someone else read it because we can notice the errors and show you.
I actually have two more things too. One is when you're rereading your story, and this isn't something you do on a first pass, it's when you're editing. But when you start seeing things that repeat, that might be a word. Like in your story, early was used a lot, like early Monday morning. I circled it in a bunch of places.
And everybody does that.
Everyone does
I
it.
use the word look so much.
I use just.
I don't know why I love the word look, but we all do it.
Right.
I
So you
use
should
prestidigitation.
You sound like that all the time.
That's a
I know,
magical
Julie.
word.
Okay. So, and like I said, you should never do that at first. Don't be consciously
nice.
looking for that when you start a story, because you want the writing to be natural when you start. It's when you're going back to edit that you can start looking for that. So whether it's the use of a particular word or it's repeat. I mean, there's a place on the first page that I noted where, what was it? Oh, in the second paragraph, suddenly she was taken back to the past, that period in their marriage that almost ended in divorce. And then the next paragraph, what if that heaven-sent storm that saved their marriage 2 years ago had not occurred? So you're essentially talking about the same thing in two different places. So whether it's repeating a word or repeating an idea. So, and there was one other thing that just slipped my mind. Does anyone, and we're going to start.
Well, yeah, it's the words that we're talking about toward the end of our discussion. Writing a short story is as difficult as writing a good poem. Every word has to carry freight itself. And if you're repeating, you're wasting. Think of, you have to pay for the words. Don't pay too much for words. Use them properly, and you won't have to overpay. Because nothing's more difficult than writing a very good short story.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yes.
Right.
It's hard. And,
congratulations
for attempting it. And I forget who said it, but writing is revising.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I think that, I think that we've given you a lot of material here, and I think once you start the revision process, you're going to get even more excited about your story.
Yes.
And then, and feel free to ignore everything we've said too, right? Because writing is very subjective. It's an art, not a science. But I
don't
think
want
once
to
you
ignore-
get into the revision process, it's, you get more excited about it, and then you read it
Yeah.
again, and you're like, oh,
Oh,
this is
much
better.
better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's tighter. It's
Yeah.
so, yeah,
Yeah, when you're done with it, send it back to Sue, and
yeah.
we can take a look at it.
We'll take a look.
It'd be interesting to do this again with the second
The
revision.
revision, yeah.
Yeah, that would be nice.
I don't know if
So-
I want to do it, but it would be
Oh,
nice
you're
to do.
stuck.
Oh,
You're
I'll do
stuck.
it.
You can work
I'll
on
do
that.
it.
I'll definitely do it.
So I guess to summarize, unless I'm missing anything. No, I didn't mean it like that. Sorry. So just to summarize, I love Dave's idea of turning this into a play, at least temporarily, so that you can learn to take every single scene and put it into dialogue so that we can really get to know the characters. I think that's the best advice. The second thing is to watch your POV shift. So when you're back in the story, your point of view, one person. And since Julie pointed out this is women's fiction, we think you want it to be Sue. But
that'll
that's up
happen
to you.
automatically if it goes
Please.
into nothing but dialogue.
That's
Yes.
true.
You will be in the right person's head all the time.
Right.
We want to
It's
feel
It's
for
like
her.
a magical solvent. It takes care of a lot of ills.
Right. And
I love
then,
your metaphors.
You do?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, good. Well, stick
You
with
got
me.
a million of
I
them.
will.
Stick with
Oh, you're stuck with me.
Yeah, you were talking about the broken back story. That's what you were saying.
Oh, the broken back story.
Yeah.
The aching back story.
Aching back, that's what it is.
so, and then the last thing is when you do get to the editing stage, that's when you can start looking for word choice and, dumbing it down a little bit so that you're not repeating yourself.
Repetition. Be careful of
Repetition.
that.
Thank you. Good word. So thank you so much for submitting. We really enjoyed reading this and working with you. And thank you to everyone else for watching. And we will see you on the next edition of Writers Infusion.
Good start.
So
Good
keep,
start.
that's right.
I think so.
Keep
Yeah.
writing.
Yep.
We need it.